The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I found the courage to open it. Plain white, hand addressed to Mrs. Rebecca Mitchell with no return address. Something about it felt dangerous, like Pandora's box waiting to unleash chaos into my perfectly curated life. I was preparing for our 20th anniversary party when it arrived. 20 years with James, the respected surgeon, community leader, and man I'd built my entire adult life around. The man who'd become increasingly distant over the past year, blaming long hospital shifts and administrative responsibilities. That Tuesday morning, with our anniversary celebration just days away, I finally sliced the envelope open while sipping my morning coffee. The scent of expensive perfume wafted from the folded pages. My stomach twisted before I'd read a single word. Dear Mrs. Mitchell, it began in elegant handwriting. You don't know me, but I've known your husband intimately for the past 11 months. The mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the Italian marble flooring James had insisted on during our recent renovation. Coffee splashed my bare legs, but I barely felt it. My eyes remained locked on the letter. 3 handwritten pages of detailed confessions from a woman named Sophia. She described their first meeting at a medical conference in Chicago, how James had removed his wedding ring before approaching her at the hotel bar, the vacations they'd taken together while I believed he was at medical symposiums, the promises he'd made about leaving me after our anniversary, once the timing was right, how he complained about me to her, how he laughed about my naivety. I'm telling you this because I've realized he's been lying to us both, she wrote. He told me you were cold, career-obsessed, and that your marriage was just for appearances. But I've watched your social media. I've seen how you look at him. He doesn't deserve either of us. The final paragraph contained information only someone truly intimate with my husband could know. Private details about birthmarks, preferences, and habits that made denial impossible. She finished with, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but I thought you deserved to know before celebrating 20 years of lies. I read the letter 3 times, each word burning deeper into my consciousness. The elegant penmanship, the expensive stationery. She'd taken care with this revelation. This wasn't a jealous outburst. It was a calculated warning from one woman to another. My hands trembled as I carefully folded the pages and returned them to the envelope. I needed time to think. The anniversary celebration, our vow renewal ceremony followed by a reception for 150 of our closest friends and family, was just 4 days away. Everyone who mattered in our social circle would be there. Colleagues from James's hospital, my publishing team, our families, childhood friends, witnesses to our supposedly enviable marriage. I walked through our 4,000-square-foot home, the home I decorated, maintained, and turned into the perfect backdrop for James's success story. The home where I'd hosted countless dinner parties to help advance his career while putting my own writing ambitions on hold. The home where I'd nursed him through his residency, supported him through his father's death, and waited patiently through years of not being ready for the children I desperately wanted. 20 years of my life, given to a man who could remove his wedding ring as easily as taking off a coat. I called my best friend Natalie, careful to keep my voice steady. Can you come over? I need your help with something for the party. Within an hour, she was sitting across from me at the kitchen island. The letter spread between us, her face transitioning from shock to rage to heartbreak on my behalf. That lying, cheating bastard, she whispered. Becca, I'm so sorry. Don't be, I replied, surprised by the calm in my voice. I'm not canceling the party. You can't possibly still want to go through with the vow renewal? She asked, incredulous. I smiled, a new clarity washing over me. Oh, we're definitely having a ceremony. Just not the one James is expecting. The signs had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The late nights, the suddenly password-protected phone, the business trips that multiplied over the past year, the new cologne I didn't recognize, the way he'd turn slightly away to text someone when he thought I wasn't watching. Classic signs that I, a writer who had literally penned articles about relationship red flags, had willfully ignored in my own marriage. As I reread Sophia's letter that evening, memories surfaced like bodies rising from dark water. 6 months ago, finding a long blonde hair on his suit jacket. Him dismissing it as, probably from that new surgical nurse. 3 months ago, a credit card statement with a charge from a jewelry store I never received a gift from. It's for my mother's birthday, he'd said. His mother's birthday was 4 months away. But perhaps what hurt most wasn't the affair itself. It was realizing how James had systematically isolated me over the years, how he'd subtly undermined my confidence, my ambitions, my relationships. Your writing is a nice hobby, he'd say whenever I mentioned returning to journalism full-time. But my position requires a certain kind of support system at home. When my mother suggested I seemed unhappy during her last visit, James later told me, your mother has always been jealous of our success. Maybe we should limit those visits. When I'd made friends with another doctor's wife who encouraged me to pursue my MFA, James found reasons to avoid couples' dinners with them. She's a bad influence on you, he'd said, always putting these restless ideas in your head. I'd given up so much of myself, piece by piece, year by year. all while believing I was building something meaningful with a man who respected me. The next morning, I drove to James's hospital during his scheduled surgery block. I knew he'd be unavailable for at least 4 hours. I found his administrative assistant, Lisa, who had always been friendly to me despite James's complaints that she was inefficient. "Rebecca, what a surprise," she said, genuinely pleased to see me. "James is in surgery until at least 2. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you," I said, closing her office door. "I need some help with our anniversary surprise." Her face lit up. "Of course. What can I do?" James misplaced some information about his Chicago conference from last September. Something about a presentation he gave that he wants to reference in his speech. "Could you possibly pull those files for me? The dates, hotel information?" Lisa hesitated for just a moment, a flicker of something crossing her face, before nodding. "Let me see what I have." While she searched her computer, I casually asked, "He mentioned meeting some important connection there. Sophia something? I should probably include her in the acknowledgments if she was significant to his work." Lisa's fingers froze over her keyboard. The pause was brief but telling. "I don't recall a Sophia," she said carefully, "but I can check the attendee list." I watched as she pulled up files, noting how she avoided my eyes. She printed several documents and handed them to me with a forced smile. "Rebecca," she said quietly as I turned to leave, "if you ever need to talk about anything, I'm here." The knowing in her eyes told me everything. She knew. Perhaps she'd even facilitated some of his lies. Back in my car, I reviewed the documents. James had indeed attended the Chicago conference, but had extended his stay by 3 days without any official reason. The hotel receipt showed room service charges for 2. Breakfast in bed for him and Sophia while I was at home, thinking he was saving lives. That evening, James came home late as usual. I greeted him with a glass of his favorite whiskey and a smile that felt like a mask stretched over my face. "How's the anniversary speech coming?" I asked. "I've been working on mine all day." He loosened his tie, looking momentarily uncomfortable. "Still working on it. You know I'm not great with public speaking." "That's not what Sophia says," I replied casually, watching his face. The glass paused halfway to his lips. His eyes met mine, searching for what I knew. "Who?" he asked, his voice perfectly controlled. "Sophia," I repeated. "Your type A surgical nurse with a blonde hair? The one always organizing department events? She mentioned how inspiring your presentation in Chicago was." The relief that flooded his face was almost comical. "Oh, right. I'd forgotten she was there." I murmured, turning away so he wouldn't see the tears threatening to spill. "I'm going to bed early. Big day tomorrow with the final party preparations." As I climbed the stairs, I heard him make a phone call, his voice low and urgent. Warning, Sophia, no doubt. Crafting new lies to cover old ones. That night, lying beside the stranger I called my husband, I realized something crucial. For years, I'd been afraid of losing James. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of disrupting the life we'd built. But as I listened to his even breathing, I understood that I'd already lost everything that mattered. I'd lost myself. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. The next morning, I woke with absolute clarity about what needed to be done. This wasn't just about exposing James's infidelity. It was about reclaiming my voice after years of being silenced. While James was in the shower, I copied Sophia's letter, placing the original in my safety deposit box at the bank. The evidence needed to be protected. Then I called Natalie. "I need you to contact everyone coming to the ceremony," I told her. "Not to cancel, just to make sure they absolutely attend, especially James's hospital board members. Tell them there's going to be a special announcement." "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "More sure than I've been about anything in years," I replied. After James left for work, I drove to see my old law professor, Marcus Chen, who had become a family friend. I'd edited his legal textbook years ago, before James had convinced me to focus solely on supporting his career. Marcus listened without interruption as I laid out everything. The affair, the gaslighting, the financial situation. I explained how James had insisted I put my inheritance into our joint accounts, how he'd encouraged me to remain financially dependent on him. "I don't want to destroy him, Marcus," I said. "I just want what's fair, and I want the truth to be known." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Rebecca, did you know that James consulted me about changing your beneficiary designations last month?" My blood ran cold. "What?" "He said you had both agreed to make his hospital foundation the primary beneficiary of your life insurance and retirement accounts. I told him both parties needed to be present for such changes." Another lie. Another betrayal deeper than I'd imagined. Marcus pulled out his laptop. "Let's talk about what you're legally entitled to. And then, let's talk about the strategy for your anniversary event." By the time I left his office, I had a comprehensive understanding of my financial rights and a concrete plan for the ceremony. Marcus had also connected me with a forensic accountant who would be investigating our finances immediately. My next stop was to see Dr. Eleanor West, the hospital's chief of surgery and James's direct superior. Though we'd met at hospital functions, James had always discouraged a closer friendship, claiming Eleanor was difficult and politically complicated. She welcomed me into her office with genuine warmth. "Rebecca, what a surprise. Is everything all right?" Not exactly, I admitted. I need to speak with you confidentially about James. For the next hour, I shared selected details about what I'd discovered. Eleanor's expression remained professional, but I noticed her hands tighten around her coffee mug. I suspected something when the Whitley grant application contained inconsistencies, she finally said. James claimed to have conducted preliminary research that didn't align with our department records. The Whitley grant? I asked. This was new information. Eleanor hesitated before continuing. It's a prestigious research grant. James is the lead applicant, but the foundation requires complete transparency from all involved parties. Including financial disclosures? I asked, thinking of the mysterious transfers I'd discovered in our accounts. Especially those. She leaned forward. Rebecca, if you're planning what I think you are, you should know the hospital board will be at your anniversary party, including Walter Whitley himself. I smiled. I'm counting on it. My final preparation was the most difficult. I called my parents, who had always adored James. They had planned to fly in for the ceremony the following day. Mom? Dad? I said carefully. There's something you need to know before you arrive. My mother gasped as I revealed the truth. My father grew silent in the way he did when truly angry. We'll be on the next flight, my mother said. Tonight. You shouldn't be alone right now. I'm not canceling the ceremony, I told them. In fact, I need you both there, supporting me. Can you do that? Whatever you need, my father said, his voice thick with emotion. We're with you, sweetheart. That evening, I sat at my vanity, looking at my reflection as I prepared for our pre-anniversary dinner with close friends. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow, stronger, more determined, her eyes clear and focused. James came up behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders. You look beautiful, he said, kissing my neck. I met his eyes in the mirror. I've been working on my vows all day, I told him. I think everyone will be surprised by what I have to say. Something in my tone made him pause, but he quickly recovered. I can't wait to hear them. He lied smoothly. As we drove to the restaurant, James reached for my hand, a gesture that once would have filled me with warmth, but now felt like another performance for a marriage that existed only in appearance. I allowed my hand to remain in his, thinking of Sophia's letter safely tucked away, of Marcus's legal strategy, of Eleanor's revelation about the grant, of the forensic accountant already uncovering James's financial deceptions. I love you, James said as we pulled into the restaurant parking lot. I turned to him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I know exactly how much you love me, I replied. And tomorrow, everyone else will know too. The day of our anniversary dawned bright and clear. Symbolic, I thought. Perfect visibility for the truth that had been hidden for so long. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. in the garden of the country club where we'd held our wedding reception 20 years earlier. A renewal of vows before 150 witnesses, followed by dinner and dancing. James had insisted on the extravagance. We've earned this celebration, he'd said. My parents arrived at our house early that morning, my mother's eyes red-rimmed but determined. My father hugged me with unusual fierceness. We've set you up with your own accounts, he whispered, just in case. Always practical, my father. James was surprisingly attentive all morning, bringing me coffee, asking if I needed anything for the ceremony. I wondered if Sophia had warned him somehow, if he suspected what was coming. But his eyes showed only the usual self-absorption, the practiced charm he'd perfected over years of building his professional reputation. Natalie arrived to help me prepare, bringing the makeup artist and hairstylist. As they worked, transforming me into the perfect picture of a devoted wife, Natalie confirmed that everyone, absolutely everyone, would be attending. The hospital board, his surgeon colleagues, even that pharmaceutical rep he's been working with, she reported. And yes, Walter Whitley confirmed personally. I nodded, meeting her eyes in the mirror. And Sophia? Accepted the invitation this morning. She'll be there. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my resolve didn't waver. At 3:30, we arrived at the venue. James went ahead to greet guests while I remained in the bridal suite, ostensibly for final touches. In reality, I was reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. The letter, financial records, text messages I'd recovered from our shared cloud account that James had forgotten I could access. At precisely 4 p.m., the music began. I walked alone down the garden path toward the flower-covered arch where James waited, smiling confidently. Our guests were seated in elegant white chairs on either side of the aisle, their faces bright with celebration. I scanned the crowd as I walked. There was Walter Whitley in the third row, Eleanor West beside him, James's surgical team, the hospital board, and there, in a discreet seat toward the back, a stunning blonde woman whose face I recognized from carefully hidden photos on James's secondary email account. Sophia, our officiant, a judge who was James's golf partner, smiled benevolently as I took my place opposite my husband. James reached for my hands, his eyes conveying nothing but adoration. The perfect performance. We are gathered here today to celebrate the renewal of vows between James and Rebecca Mitchell, the judge began. 20 years of partnership, respect, and fidelity. I felt a laugh bubble up at the irony but suppressed it. Before they exchange their renewed vows, James and Rebecca have prepared personal messages for each other. James, would you like to begin? James cleared his throat, producing a folded paper from his pocket. Rebecca, he started, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. 20 years ago, I promised to love and cherish you. Today, I stand before our friends and family to reaffirm that promise. He continued with beautiful platitudes about partnership and gratitude, about my support through his career, about looking forward to many more years together. His performance was flawless, emotional at just the right moments, humble yet confident. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience, except for mine. Rebecca, the judge prompted, would you like to share your vows now? Yes, I said clearly. I would. I stepped away from James, turning slightly to address our guests directly. From my clutch, I withdrew not note cards but Sophia's letter. I had planned to write my own vows, I began, my voice steady, but I recently received a more honest assessment of our marriage that I'd like to share instead. James's face registered confusion, then alarm. I saw him take a half step toward me, but it was too late. Dear Mrs. Mitchell, I read, projecting my voice to reach even the back rows. You don't know me, but I've known your husband intimately for the past 11 months. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. I continued reading, my voice growing stronger with each sentence detailing their affair. I described the vacations, the lies, the promises James had made to leave me. James's face drained of color. Rebecca, stop, he hissed. This is insane. I ignored him, continuing to read. When I reached the parts detailing their intimate moments, James lunged for the letter. That's enough, he shouted. My father and Marcus Chen were suddenly there, positioning themselves between us. The audience was in chaos, murmurs, gasps, the scraping of chairs as people stood for a better view of the unfolding drama. James, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, perhaps you'd like to explain to our guests, including the hospital board and Mr. Whitley, why funds from our joint accounts were transferred to an offshore account last month. The same amount, coincidentally, as the Whitley Foundation grant? Eleanor West stood up. James? Is this true? James's face contorted, panic replacing his usual controlled expression. This is a private matter, he stammered. Rebecca is clearly what, James? I interrupted. Clearly aware that you've been falsifying research data? Clearly aware that you've been embezzling grant money? Or clearly aware that you've been living a double life? I turned to face our guests directly. I apologize for this public display, but I refuse to participate in one more lie. For years, I've supported James's career while he systematically undermined mine. I've defended him to friends who saw what I couldn't. I've invested my inheritance into our shared life while he secretly prepared to leave me. Throughout the audience, people were standing now. Walter Whitley was in urgent conversation with Eleanor West. James's colleagues wore expressions ranging from shock to vindication. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had suspected something. And then I saw her, Sophia, slipping quietly toward the exit. Our eyes met briefly across the garden. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a somber recognition. She gave me the smallest nod before disappearing. I turned back to James, who stood frozen, his perfect life crumbling around him. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not the successful surgeon, not the charming husband, but a deeply insecure man who had built his success on lies and manipulation. And then, as the full impact of what was happening hit him, the professional consequences, the personal humiliation, the financial implications, James Mitchell, celebrated surgeon, began to cry. Not gentle tears, but racking, desperate sobs that bent him double. In front of everyone who had ever respected him. In front of the hospital board that would soon be investigating him. In front of colleagues who had admired him. In front of friends who had envied our perfect marriage. I've filed for divorce, I announced quietly. Though in the stunned silence, everyone heard me. The papers were served to your office this morning. I've also submitted evidence of financial irregularities to the hospital board and the Whitley Foundation. I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the podium. Our marriage has been a performance for a long time, James. Today's performance is over. As I walked back up the aisle alone, head high, I heard the whispers, saw the shocked faces, felt the weight of 20 years lifting from my shoulders with each step. My parents and Natalie fell into step beside me. Marcus Chen was already on his phone, no doubt setting the next phase of our legal strategy into motion. Behind me, James remained at the altar, broken and exposed, finally facing the consequences of his actions. The months following what became known in our social circle as the revelation were both harder and easier than I'd anticipated. Harder because dismantling a 20-year marriage involves untangling countless legal, financial, and emotional threads. Easier because with each thread severed, I felt more genuinely myself than I had in decades. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly. James, desperate to minimize further damage to his reputation, agreed to a generous settlement. The hospital board launched a full investigation into his research and financial activities, resulting in his suspension pending review. The Whitley Foundation withdrew their grant consideration and initiated their own audit. I declined all interview requests from local media, ignoring the speculation and gossip that inevitably followed such a public exposure. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, not just my life, but my sense of self. 3 months after the ceremony, I signed the final divorce papers in Marcus Chen's office. As I put down the pen, he slid a business card across the desk. "The editor-in-chief at Berkeley Press," he explained. "She's interested in your book proposal." I stared at the card, momentarily speechless. The proposal, a manuscript examining how high-achieving women often become supporting characters in their own lives, had been my secret project for months. "I didn't submit a proposal," I said. Marcus smiled. "Natalie did. With your notes and sample chapters. Said you gave her permission." I hadn't, of course, but my best friend had known exactly what I needed before I did. 6 months after the ceremony, my parents helped me move into a light-filled apartment in the city, a modern space overlooking the park, nothing like the traditional colonial home James had insisted was appropriate for a surgeon's wife. I filled it with books, art, and furniture that reflected my tastes rather than a carefully curated image. On a crisp autumn evening, I hosted my first dinner party. Just Natalie, my parents, Marcus and his wife, and Eleanor West, who had become both a friend and mentor as I navigated my new independence. "Have you heard from him?" Eleanor asked quietly as we stood on my balcony after dinner. I shook my head. "Not directly. His lawyer says he's taken a position at a hospital in Phoenix." "And Sophia?" I smiled slightly. "She sent me an email. She's back in Chicago, working on her PhD. She apologized again." "Do you forgive her?" Eleanor asked. I considered this. "I think I do. She was deceived too, in her way. And she did the right thing in the end." The truth was, my anger had mellowed into something closer to gratitude. Sophia's letter had been the catalyst for my freedom, painful but necessary. 1 year after The Revelation, my book was published to critical acclaim. The morning it hit the bestseller list, I received a small package at my door. Inside was a vintage fountain pen with a note that read simply, "For signing your next contract. Some endings are really beginnings." It wasn't signed, but I recognized Sophia's handwriting. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the city gold. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, desperately trying to preserve a marriage that existed only in appearance, sacrificing my own ambitions and identity for a man who had never truly seen me. I thought about the moment I stood up in front of everyone and reclaimed my voice by reading that letter. The moment when years of quiet submission had transformed into strength. My phone rang, my literary agent calling with news of foreign rights sales for the book. "They're calling you the voice of a movement," she said excitedly. "Women everywhere are responding to your story." After we hung up, I remained on the balcony, watching nightfall over the city. In the distance, I could see the hospital where James and I had attended countless fundraisers and galas, where I'd smiled perfectly while being introduced as Dr. Mitchell's wife. Now I was simply Rebecca, author, woman, survivor, the protagonist of my own story. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to Sophia, wherever she was, to the letter that had shattered my illusions and set me free. Some truths, once spoken, can never be unheard. Some letters, once read, change everything. And sometimes, watching someone cry in front of everyone is the first step toward your own healing.